Welcome back to the channel, my name is Jack, I make videos about all things tech, and today I wanted to show you some of the camera settings and editing tools that I use on my iPhone so that you can take shots that look like this. The camera is one of my favourite features on the iPhone. It's definitely one of my most used. I'm always taking pictures on the go and when I'm travelling for Instagram, particularly architectural shots, shots of buildings and shapes and textures. I love capturing things like that. There's a saying that the best camera that you have is the one that you have with you. And I think that there's some truth to that. I mean, we're all carrying these smartphones around with us now, and the cameras on these are getting pretty incredible. You can get some really amazing shots of them wherever you are. But I want to share with you some tips and useful settings for the camera app and some editing tricks that you can use to really take your Insta photos to that next level. So let's take a look. Now, you're probably quite familiar with the native camera app that is already installed on the iPhone, but you might not know that there are some settings for the camera app that are hidden away in the settings app. If we just scroll down to the bottom here, you'll find the camera section. Under this first menu, we've got our format options. I've left high efficiency on. This is the default and it saves your photos in the HEIF format, which has all the same quality of a JPEG, but at half the file size. So there's no real downside to it. Next, under photo capture, we have the ProRAW setting, and you should definitely turn this on if you want to be able to capture the absolute best quality photos from the iPhone. With this turned on, you'll get a new button in the top right corner of the camera app that lets you toggle on ProRAW when you're shooting. ProRAW is Apple's high quality image format that captures even more information in the save files versus a standard JPEG. It has even more information in the shadows and the highlights, which gives you even more dynamic range, and it gives you even more scope when editing. You can sort of push the edits further than you can versus a standard JPEG, which tends to fall apart quite quickly when you make some extreme edits. And if you have a 14 Pro or Pro Max, there's also an option here that lets you shoot full resolution 48 megapixel photos and take full advantage of that big new sensor on these newer iPhones. And with that, you get even more information and detail to work with for cropping in and reframing your images. By default, the 14 Pros bin down 48 megapixel photos into 12 megapixels, regardless of if ProRAW is turned on, unless you toggle it on in this menu. But with all that extra resolution and image information, these ProRAW images get pretty big pretty quickly. A standard JPEG or HEIF image will be around 2 to 3 megabytes. A 48 megapixel ProRAW shot will be around 75 megabytes. That's around 20 times bigger. I've even had some come out over 100 megabytes before, so yeah, just 10 of those is going to add up to over a gigabyte, which is going to fill up your phone pretty quickly, especially if you have a smaller capacity iPhone. It also disables live photos, and it takes a lot longer to take a ProRAW shot versus a standard shot. You'll notice there's a bit of a lag on the shutter, which means you could miss a fast action shot. So for most photos, I'll just shoot in the standard mode, and then I will toggle on ProRAW just to shoot those sort of extra special killer shots when I really think I'll need that extra resolution or that extra scope when editing with all the information that's saved in the file. But it's definitely worth turning on in the settings here just so you have quicker access to it in the camera app and take the image quality to that next level. Now, the preserve settings menu is another really good one. This is a real big time saver. What this does is you've got a load of settings here that you can toggle on that you want the camera app to remember when you leave the app and then come back to it. So for example, with this first one for camera mode, when this is toggled on and you're in the camera app and you switch from photo over into video mode and then you leave the camera app and then do something else and then come back to it, it will still be in video when you come back. There's also the same options for creative controls if you like to use any of the filters on the iPhone, macro control, which I'll explain later, exposure adjustment, portrait zoom. Now, I don't actually use portrait mode that often on the iPhone because I think sometimes it can just look a bit kind of artificial and it just doesn't quite look right. But on the 14 Pros with their big new sensor, you actually get a really nice natural shallow depth of field anyway. So a lot of the time I don't feel like I need to use it. But when I do use it, I prefer it when it has the 2x or the 3x zoom as opposed to the 1x that it defaults at. I just prefer that longer focal length. You can also enable it here for ProRAW and ProRes to stop the switching back to the standard shooting modes. But I don't have them enabled here because I know that I'll just forget and then I'll end up filling up my phone with a load of massive ProRAW files. But yeah, try experimenting with some of these because depending on how you shoot, these can really save you a lot of time. Under composition, there are two really important settings. The first one is the grid, which you should definitely enable as this just helps you shoot and follow the rule of thirds. This basically divides the viewfinder into a grid of 9 boxes. And then when composing the shot, you want to put your subject or point of interest on one of the 4 spots where the lines cross and intersect here, as opposed to right in the middle, and this just makes your composition look more visually pleasing and more balanced. I've also turned off view outside the frame. When this is on, you'll see a preview of the ultra-wide camera around the viewfinder of the One X main, which is kind of cool, but I do find it a bit distracting and a bit sort of harder to focus on my framing. So yeah, since turning it off, I've definitely just found it a lot easier to really sort of just focus on my shot and my composition. And it also gives you a much cleaner look in the camera app. Then lastly, here at the bottom, I've also turned on the macro control. And what this does is, you might have noticed in the camera app, when you get close to something with the main camera, it automatically switches into macro mode using the ultra wide. And sometimes you don't want it to do that, it just does it on its own. And what this setting does is it adds this yellow button in the corner when it switches into macro that you can tap to switch back to the main camera. Which is also really useful if you ever shoot with mobile lenses, as that can cause the camera app to switch into macro mode as well. So this lets you have control over that. Now, jumping into the camera app, I've got a few more tips that you might not know about. Firstly, you can see that we've got our grid enabled and we've got our ProRAW toggle that we turned on in the settings. Up here, there's an arrow button you can tap, or you can just swipe up on the viewfinder to reveal a few more hidden options. You can set the photographic style or change the picture aspect ratio. Exposure just lets you change how bright and how dark the image is. And just for a tip, when shooting in ProRAW and it's a bright sunny day, I'll often just sort of slide this down to -0.3 or 0.7 just to make sure that nothing in the image is overexposed. You can always then recover some of those details in the shadows when editing afterwards, especially with ProRAW. Sliding along, we've got options for the selfie timer and also the filters. The camera app has had a few filters built in for quite a while now, and they are worth checking out. These are all non-destructive, which means that you can remove them after you've taken the photo if you change your mind, which is pretty cool. Apple added these like quite a few years ago. I think it was in iOS 7 when they first did that big UI refresh, but they haven't added any more since, and I kind of wish they would, or even better if they'd let us create our own filters that we can apply before shooting just to help take some of those steps out from editing afterwards. Speaking of which, let's get into editing. Now, there's a few apps that I like to edit with, but lately I've been finding myself coming back to Photomator. I'll link to it in the description so you can check it out. And just to say, this is not a sponsored video or anything. I bought the app with my own money like years ago and I've been using it for quite a while. And I really like it for a few reasons. Firstly, it's universal, so it works on iPhone and iPad with the same features across both. And sometimes it's nice to have that bigger screen to edit with. And they also just recently released a Mac version, and all edits will sync across all device platforms, which is amazing. Secondly, editing is completely non-destructive. That means that no matter what changes you make to the original file, you can always revert back to the original image if you ever change your mind. Then lastly, it has a load of editing tools and adjustments, which I'll show you, batch editing to apply and edit to multiple photos at once, and more advanced features like selective adjustments and masking and even AI upscaling. You can get Photomator either as a subscription or as a lifetime purchase, whichever suits you. I love that they have both options. It's really easy to use and really powerful once you've had a play around and got to grips with it. So let's edit some photos. And just to add, you should be able to replicate a lot of what I'll show you in the editing app of your choice. It doesn't have to be Photomator. So we'll start first with just a quick little look around the UI, as I'm sure some of you may not have seen this app before. The app has full access to your photo library. I've just selected a few to show you today. And we'll start first with this image that I took in Athens last year. At the top, we have our machine learning button, and that will automatically apply a load of edits for us just for a quick edit. Next to that, we have the healing brush to remove something from the image. Then the crop tool, and I'll show you that later on as there's a really powerful and important tool in there. If we tap on the 3 sliders, we'll get access to some filters at the bottom, and the app actually comes with a load of filters pre-installed that you can use as a base when you want to start editing. And you can create your own filters and share them and download more. I've made my own set and I'll probably share them at some point. But for now, I just want to revert back to the original image and we'll start from fresh. Now, if we slide up from the filter strip at the bottom, we have access to all of our editing tools. And the first tip I have for this app is if you tap on the 3-dot menu here and go to Customize Adjustments, you can actually customize exactly what tools you have at the bottom of the screen. I actually like to have all of them, so I'm going to press show all adjustments, and now they're all available at the bottom to have access to. So we've got our basic things like exposure, highlight, shadows adjustments. We've got hue and saturation, selective color. And for this image, I'm actually going to start with color curves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag up the left side of the curve here, and the right side I'm going to just drag down a bit. And then I'm going to put a point about 25% along and 75% along, and I'm going to drag this side up a bit and drag this side down a bit. So now we have a nice kind of curve. And what this has done is it's removed some of the contrast and brought back some of the color. If you hold on the image, you can see a before and after. Now, when I'm editing, I tend to go for quite a subtle look. I don't go for anything too extreme. I usually go for more of a muted look. So from here, I'm going to go back to the top and I'm going to just adjust some of these basic adjustments as I like. Now, if you're new to editing and you don't know what any of these tools do, I recommend just sort of grabbing them and just dragging them left and right, just so you can actually see and understand how it changes the image. And if you have trouble dragging this slider to a precise location, you can actually just tap on the left or right sides to go up and down, or tap on the percentage and then just type in whatever you want and just go straight to that percentage. Now for this image, I'm just going to bring the exposure up a little bit, and I'm going to also bring the highlights up as well to about 8. I'm going to bring back the shadows to bring back some of that contrast. And then I'm also going to grab the contrast slider and add some contrast back here. I'm also going to add some clarity back to the image, I want to bring out some of that detail in the stonework. And if we just drag this back down, we can see more of that image, and hold down to see the before and the after. And what I'm trying to do here is just bring back some of that color in the stonework, because I just think it looks really nice. And I think like the original image was a little bit sort of too contrasty for my liking. So I'm just trying to bring it down a bit. And I'm actually quite liking how that looks already. I don't want to adjust the colors too much because I'm quite liking it, but you could adjust the entire saturation with this slider here. But another tool that I like to use is the selective color. And what this does is you can see here a graph of all of the colors that are in the image. So these sort of yellow orange tones would represent the columns, and this blue spike here would be the sky. Now, if we select the oranges, we can adjust just the oranges that are in the picture. So we could actually literally just take all of the saturation out of these and then go for more of like a white stone column look, or bring back some of that color and go more the other way. But I actually, to be honest, quite liked how it was. So I'm actually just gonna take it down just a little bit to -4. And with the blue on the sky, we could adjust the hue of the sky. Some people I know like that sort of orange and teal look, and you could do that by dragging that slider to the left. I quite liked how the sky was. I'm just gonna actually maybe take it a little more the other way, make it a little bit more blue. So I'm just gonna go around 4% into the blue. Now you can also tap this button up here to bring a split view and see the before here and the after. And I'm really liking how this is turning out. I do actually have one more big adjustment that I think is gonna really make this image just look a lot better, which I'll show you in a sec. First, I just wanna go down to the bottom, and I'm just going to add a little more sharpness to the image. So I'm just gonna zoom in, and if we toggle it on and off, we can see what the difference is making. I think that 2.5 pixels is a little bit too much for me, so I'm just gonna take it down to 2 pixels, maybe 1.8. That looks quite nice. And now we've brought a bit more of that detail back. Now I chose this particular image for a reason, because I want to show you the next step. This is something that I always do on architectural shots and building shots, as I think it really kind of elevates the image. And it's not something that I see that many people do, but I think it can really just take your image to the next level, and it really makes it just look a lot more pleasing. So we're going to go to the crop menu, and we've got our crop, straighten and perspective tools. And the tool I want to show you is the perspective tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the perspective of this image so that all of the columns are parallel to the size of the image, so they're all standing up vertically. And as I said, I chose this shot deliberately because it's going to be quite an extreme difference, and you'll really be able to see the before and after. So if we slide over to the left, it's going to warp the top of the image and sort of make those columns stand vertical. Now, when you're doing this, sometimes you might find that you can't get the vertical lines in the image to be perfectly straight up. So you might have to go over to the straighten tool and just tweak the rotation of the image, because it might have been that you just weren't holding the phone perfectly level at the time. So I'm just going to make a few adjustments here, and it does give you a grid on screen so you can sort of line this up. And that's looking pretty good. I think that just looks a lot better than the previous shot. Now, I'm not saying you have to do this for every image. I mean, sometimes it's nice to have that sort of forced perspective looking up of something sort of towering over you. But here I just really like having sort of all of those columns all in a line standing up. Now there is just one more change I want to make to this image. If we zoom into this bottom corner, we can see that there are some people going down the stairs, and it's fine that they're there, but I don't want them there, so I'm going to get rid of them. So if we go over to the heal tool, we can just adjust the size of the brush here at the bottom and then brush over them to get rid of them. And you might have to do this 1 or 2 times to get it to look right. You might need to undo and then redo it and do it again. But you don't have to get it to look perfect because it is just something small in the corner and no one's going to zoom in and notice. And I'm also just going to do the same again here up in the sky, just to get rid of some of these clouds and just clean the image up a bit. And there we have our final image, and I'm really happy with how that's turned out. I think the perspective change has really made this look a lot better. We can now save that to the camera roll and it will modify the original image, but we can always revert back to it whenever we want. Now for this next shot, I'm going to use a photo I took of Buckingham Palace. And this time I'm going to start with one of the filters that I made as a base and then tweak it from there. For me, filters are sort of a starting point, and then I like to make my tweaks and edits to get the image looking exactly how I want. And what I want to do is I want to make some of the stonework look a little more vibrant. So I'm just going to drag up the shadows a bit and make the stones look a little cleaner. And then I'm quite liking actually how most of this image has turned out straight from the filter. I'm going to make the clarity a little higher just to bring out some more detail. And I am going to adjust the hue saturation of the sky because I think it's looking a little bit too sort of greeny to me. I'm going to take it back to more of a blue colour. And already I'm liking how that's looking. If we look at the before and after, I think that looks a lot better. So now I'm going to head over to our crop tool, to the perspective, and I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to drag to the right to warp the top of the image and get those straight lines. And this time I wasn't holding the phone quite level, so I'm going to straighten the image. This sometimes just take a little bit of back and forth, but then after a few tweaks, it looks really good. And again, this is the before and after. Just a nice subtle look. Now for this next one, we'll do something a little different. So we'll go for these delicious pancakes that I had. Once again, I'm actually going to start from my filter as a base. I actually think that's turned out really well already. I am just going to make a few slight tweaks though. I'm going to bring up the highlights a little bit and bring up the contrast just to make everything a bit punchier. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop out my friend's food up in the corner because I want the focus to be on my delicious pancakes. And that's done. Easy peasy. Now you can also hold your finger on any of these images and revert back to the original at any time, or you can copy the color adjustments and then paste them onto one or a load of other images all at once for some really fast batch editing. This next one is a photo I took in Spain. And again, I'm gonna use one of the filters I made as a starting point, but I do think it needs a little bit of tweaking. So I'm just gonna jump in here. Just gonna bring the shadows down a bit. I'm gonna go down to the selective color and I'm gonna adjust the colour of the greens in the image. I want them to look a little bit more green, and the sky is again a little bit too on the green side, so I'm going to push those into the blues, and that's looking pretty nice. But once again, I want to adjust the perspective to get all the vertical lines parallel to the sides of the photo. So I'm going to drag the perspective slider over. I'm going to need to straighten the image a little bit, and it can take a few tweaks, but then I think it ends up looking really nice. And that's the before and the after. And I could really just sit here all day editing these. It's kind of quite relaxing. But now I'm going to show you another really useful tool in this app. So if we go to this photo here, this is actually a ProRAW image, so we can zoom in quite far and see lots of detail. And what I want to show you is under the edit menu, if we drag up to get our edit tools, this whole time we've been editing using what's called the image layer, or in this case, the raw layer, which is the entire image. If we tap on this, and we tap on the plus in the corner, we can actually have the app automatically select parts of the image for us. So for example, it can select the subject and it will take a second to analyze, and it selected me, it's identified me as the subject of the image. Or we can do the same again and have it select the sky. Again, it will analyze for a sec and it has selected the sky for us. And now what we can do is when we edit using these tools here and the sky selected, these changes are only going to apply to the sky. The rest of the image will remain unchanged. And you do also have options to draw with a brush or use a line or radial gradient as well. You don't have to use the smart selection. So that's a really useful tool if you want to selectively edit parts of the image without affecting the image as a whole. You can really do some sort of quite creative edits using this tool. So that's how I like to edit some of my photos in Photomator. While I waffle on, I'll show you a few more pictures that I've edited. I tend to go for, as I said, more of like a soft muted look. I don't like anything too extreme, but I really like using that perspective tool on architectural shots and buildings to get all the straight lines in the image sort of parallel to each other. I think it just creates a really striking and powerful image. Try it out with some of your photos and let me know how you get on in the comments. I will link to Photomator in the description so you can check it out. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video or you learned something today. And if you want to see more tech videos from me, you can hit subscribe and the bell. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.